It was another Friday night, and the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that usually settled in when my roommate, Jake, was out. We were both in our early 20s, living in a small apartment near campus. It wasn't anything special, but it worked. Two guys sharing a space. Everything routine, everything in its place. I sat on the couch, the soft hum of the refrigerator in the background as I mindlessly scrolled through my phone. The world outside was dark, rain tapping softly against the windows as the autumn chill settled in. The city seemed far away tonight, muffled by the constant beat of the storm. Jake had been out with some friends for hours. The usual Friday routine: grab drinks, play pool, talk about life like we all had the answers. He'd left earlier, his usual confident swagger in place as he grabbed his jacket and waved goodbye, the door closing with its familiar thud behind him. I hadn't expected him back anytime soon. I didn't mind the solitude. I'd always been someone who enjoyed the quiet, who could easily lose myself in my own thoughts, wrapped in the comfort of the apartment's familiar surroundings. There were moments when I was grateful for the peace of being alone, away from the constant noise of the outside world. But tonight, there was a lingering unease I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the storm outside, the way the shadows in the apartment seemed deeper than usual. Maybe it was the strange weight in my chest, something I couldn't explain, but it was there, a subtle tension, a hint of something I wasn't ready to confront. I heard the sound of keys jingling in the lock. Jake had come back earlier than I'd expected. He was home. I stood up, pushing the uneasy feeling aside as I made my way to the hallway. But when I saw him at the door, something wasn't right. He was swaying slightly, his face flushed, eyes a little too bright. The smell of alcohol hit me almost immediately. "You okay?" I asked, trying to hide the concern in my voice. Jake grinned, his usual cocky charm making its appearance. "Yeah, man, just a little too much fun at the bar." I tried to ignore the knot tightening in my stomach as I watched him stagger, slightly, bracing himself against the doorframe. The usual confidence he carried was gone, replaced by something more vulnerable, something unfamiliar. "Maybe you should sit down for a bit," I suggested, stepping aside to let him in. He nodded, but there was something in the way he looked at me, something that made my heart beat a little faster. Was it the alcohol talking, or was it something else? As he passed by me, our shoulders brushed. Just a small touch, nothing that should have mattered, but it lingered, a feeling I couldn't explain. And then the tension came crashing back. I felt it then, the way things were about to change. The way the night was going to be different from any other Friday night we'd had before. I just didn't know yet how much it would change everything. Jake collapsed onto the couch, his movements sluggish as he kicked his shoes off. I stood there for a moment, still unsure of what to make of this new version of him. More disheveled, more vulnerable than I had ever seen. His usual bravado was stripped away, leaving him almost human. "You good?" I asked again, stepping into the living room to sit on the opposite end of the couch. I tried to keep my voice casual, but the question felt heavier this time. "Yeah, man, just a little too much whiskey, you know? Happens." He waved his hand as though it was nothing, but I could tell he was struggling to steady himself. I watched as he leaned back, closing his eyes for a second, his head resting on the cushion. It was strange. He never let himself show weakness. I couldn't remember a time when he wasn't the one holding it all together, always the life of the party, the guy everyone relied on. But tonight, he looked different. "Want some water?" I offered, trying to lighten the mood. "Nah, I'll be fine," Jake muttered, still keeping his eyes closed, as though trying to fight off the spin in his head. "Just need to sleep this off." There was something in the air that felt like it was hanging, waiting. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, the walls a little too close. The storm outside, with its relentless tapping against the windows, seemed like the only thing still moving in a world that had somehow frozen in place. I wasn't sure what was happening, but I could feel it building, tension like static electricity in the air. Every time Jake shifted, every time I caught a glimpse of him, something stirred deep within me. For a while, we just sat there in silence. The only sounds the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustle of Jake's movement. He was drunk, sure, but there was something else, something deeper beneath the alcohol haze that made the air between us feel charged. I watched as he shifted on the couch, turning slightly toward me. His eyes, still a little glassy, met mine. There was an intensity to them now, something unspoken. You know, he began, his voice slurring slightly. I don't really get you sometimes, man. I blinked, taken off guard by the suddenness of the words. What do you mean? He looked at me for a long moment, as if deciding how to phrase it. You're just always there, you know? Always around, never judging. I frowned slightly. I don't judge, Jake. We've been friends for a long time. He nodded slowly, but his gaze dropped to the floor as if he was trying to find something to focus on. Yeah, but you're different. You don't act like everyone else. Like me. I could feel the knot in my stomach tightening. There was a weight to his words now, something heavier than a drunken confession. What do you mean by that? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Jake turned toward me then, his posture shifting, his face more serious. The vulnerability was there, raw and unfiltered. I mean, you're not like the others. You don't care if I'm an asshole, or if I drink too much, or if I do things I shouldn't. You're just always there, and I don't get why. The room suddenly felt warmer, too close. My throat felt dry, and I swallowed, unsure how to respond. His words seemed innocent, but there was a weight to them, a tension that had built up between us without either of us noticing. I shifted uncomfortably, my fingers curling into the fabric of the couch. Because I'm your friend, I said, trying to keep the tone light, but my voice betrayed me, sounding more serious than I intended. I'm not going anywhere, Jake. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he studied me for a long, unnerving moment, as if he was trying to figure something out. The air between us crackled, and my mind raced, unsure of how to navigate this. The drunken haze in his eyes was clear, but there was something more now, something deeper. You know, Jake started again, his voice trailing off. You ever wonder why I don't ever let anyone get close? I wasn't sure if I should answer, if this was the kind of conversation we were having now. But something in the way he was looking at me, something in the way his breath had quickened just a little, made me want to answer. To understand. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I've wondered. Jake leaned forward, his body language shifting again, and this time, the space between us felt smaller, impossibly close. It's because he paused, searching for the right words. His hand moved to his forehead as if trying to gather his thoughts. Because I'm afraid, man, of getting too close to anyone. Afraid of what happens if I do. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, the pulse of my heart picking up. Something inside me told me to pull away, to give him space, but the other part of me I didn't fully understand, want to close that gap, to sit closer, to listen. Jake took another unsteady breath, still watching me closely. His voice dropped almost a whisper. You're not like the others, and I don't know what to do with that. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What are you saying? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes dropping to the space between us, but when he looked back at me, there was a shift. Something in his gaze had changed. He didn't seem drunk anymore, not in the same way. I don't know. Jake's voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I saw real vulnerability in him. I think I'm afraid of what this is. What is? I asked, barely able to speak. But Jake didn't answer right away. His eyes locked onto mine, his breathing shallow, his lips parted as though he was about to say something that could change everything. And then, before I could react, his hand reached out. The touch was light at first, just a brush of his fingers against mine. But it was enough to make everything stop. My heart skipped, and the air in the room grew heavy with the unspoken tension between us. I didn't pull away. He didn't either. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, breathing in the silence, the tension thick in the room. Jake's hand rested on the couch, just inches from mine. I could feel the heat of his skin radiating through the space between us, and every part of me screamed to either pull away or move closer. But I stayed still, unsure what the right choice was. I was afraid. He was too, and neither of us knew how to move forward. The air between us was thick with something unspoken. Every second stretched longer than the last, as if time itself had slowed down, waiting for one of us to make a move. My breath was shallow, my hands clenched by my sides, torn between the desire to pull away or leaning closer. Jake's fingers were still near mine, but now they rested on the arm of the couch. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, his eyes fixed on me with a kind of intensity one had never seen before. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what could be said. The lines between us, once so clear and simple, had begun to blur, leaving me unsure of where the friendship ended and something else, something deeper, began. You're not like them, you know that. Jake's voice was low, almost a whisper, but it sent a ripple through the stillness of the room. You don't treat me like everyone else. You don't try to fix me or tell me what I should be. I nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. Jake was staring at his hands now, twisting his fingers together as though looking for a way to explain what had been building inside him for a long time. But there was hesitation in his movements, an uncertainty in his eyes that mirrored my own. He took another deep breath and looked up at me, his eyes searching mine for something. Maybe an answer, maybe permission. I think you know what I'm trying to say, he said, his voice quieter now, almost cracking. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. The slight buzz of the overhead lamp seemed louder than before, and the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows was the only thing grounding me to the present moment. Everything else, the space between us, the unspoken words, the emotions swirling just beneath the surface, felt like it could break apart any second. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. I was afraid of what would happen if I acknowledged the truth, if I gave in to what had been quietly building between us for months, maybe longer. I had never questioned my friendship with Jake. He had always been my roommate, my best friend, someone I could rely on. But tonight, everything felt different. Jake, I started, but my voice faltered. I didn't know where to begin. Jake leaned forward slightly, his body language shifting. The small space between us felt insignificant now. His eyes dropped from mine for a second, then flickered back up to meet them. His pupils were dilated, his face flushed with something more than just alcohol. And then, in the next breath, it happened. Jake reached out, his hand sliding into mine. The touch was electric, an unexpected shock that jolted through my body, leaving me frozen in place. He didn't let go. Instead, he pulled me closer, his other hand coming up to gently rest against my cheek. Jake, wait, I whispered, but it was too late. His lips brushed against mine in a hesitant kiss. It wasn't forceful. It wasn't rushed. It was gentle, like he was testing the waters. His breath was warm against my skin, his hand trembling slightly as it cupped my face. I could feel the uncertainty in the way he held me. But there was also something else, something that felt raw and undeniable. My entire body seemed to come alive at the touch. I couldn't pull away. I couldn't move. The kiss lingered for a moment longer than I had expected, and in that silence, I could hear the pounding of my heart, the quickness of my breath, and the overwhelming feeling of confusion that rushed through me. When the kiss finally broke, we both pulled back slightly, but neither of us moved away. Jake's hand stayed where it was, still resting against my face. His gaze was intense, his lips parted, as if he was searching for something, an answer, an explanation, or maybe just reassurance. We were both silent, both unsure of what had just happened. I had never imagined something like this could happen between us. We had been friends, roommates. But in that one moment, everything had changed. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the silence, but the words didn't come. How could I explain this? How could I put into words what had just occurred? Jake's thumb brushed over my cheek, and I felt it like a spark, a jolt that ran through me, stirring up 1,000 emotions all at once. His eyes searched mine again, and I could see the questions in them, the same questions that were swirling in my mind. I don't know why I did that. Jake finally murmured, his voice low and uncertain. His hand dropped away from my face, and I felt the loss of it immediately. I don't know what I'm doing, man. I wanted to tell him that it was okay, that maybe I didn't know either, but that didn't matter. But my own voice was caught in my throat. What had I just allowed to happen? Was this just a mistake? Was I just another person in his life who had crossed a line, only to retreat when the truth became too complicated? Before I could speak, Jake stood up abruptly, his movements jerky, like he was trying to regain control of himself. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, shaking his head as if trying to clear it. "I shouldn't have done that. I don't know what I was thinking." I stood up too, the need to say something fighting its way to the surface. "Jake, wait." But he was already walking toward the door, pulling his jacket on in a hurry. "I'm going out," he said quickly, his back turned to me. "I need some air." I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching him grab his keys and leave without another word. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me standing in the same living room, the same apartment, but somehow everything felt different now. The kiss, whatever it had been, was left unresolved. The confusion, the desire, the fear, all tangled together in the silence that followed. What just happened? Where do we go from here? I couldn't answer those questions, and maybe neither could Jake. I sat back down on the couch, my head spinning, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. Was it a mistake? Was this something Jake would regret tomorrow? Or was this a moment that had shifted everything between us, forever? But in the silence that stretched on, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The door clicked shut behind Jake with a quiet finality that echoed through the apartment. The air between us had shifted, leaving only an uncomfortable silence in its wake. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the space where he had just been, still trying to process everything that had just happened. I could still feel the warmth of his touch on my skin, the echo of his breath against my face. It had been a kiss, a moment of intense, unspoken emotion, but it felt like so much more. It was the culmination of something that had been building for a while, something we hadn't said aloud, something neither of us knew how to handle. But now he was gone. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the room, my mind racing in every direction. Had he really meant it? Was it just a result of too much alcohol, a fleeting impulse that would fade by morning? Or had I misread everything? The last thing I wanted was to make things awkward between us, but the truth was I couldn't stop thinking about it. The uncertainty weighed heavily on me. I glanced at the clock, nearly 2 a.m. The apartment was still, too still, and the sudden quiet felt suffocating. The storm outside had let up, leaving behind an eerie calm, a perfect reflection of the emotional chaos inside me. I sat back down on the couch, my hands gripping the armrests, my mind replaying everything over and over again. The way his lips had hesitated against mine, the tension that had been building for weeks. Was it just me who felt that? Or had he felt it too? The sound of my phone buzzing on the coffee table startled me, cutting through the stillness. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Jake. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing on me. What if this was a text to apologize? What if he regretted it? I wasn't sure if I could handle that right now. But then again, I knew I couldn't ignore him either. Not when everything felt so unfinished. I swiped the screen, opening the message. Jake, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have left. I just need some time to think. Can we talk tomorrow? I exhaled, a mix of relief and frustration flooding through me. He was as conflicted as I was, and I couldn't tell if that was a good thing or not. But I understood. Time was what we both needed. I typed a quick reply, my fingers moving slowly over the keys. I'm here when you're ready. I hit send, then stared at the message, the words feeling both comforting and painful at the same time. I want to talk. I want to know what he was thinking, what he was feeling. But at the same time, I didn't want to force it. As I set my phone down, I couldn't help but wonder if things would ever go back to normal. I thought about all the times we had spent together, the moments we had shared, and how quickly everything had changed in a single instant. Could I go back to being just his roommate, just his friend, after this? Or is there something more now? I tried to sleep that night, but it was impossible. My mind wouldn't quiet down. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jake's face, the way he had looked at me just before he kissed me. Vulnerable, unsure, but also hopeful. It was as if he had been waiting for me to take that step, to make the decision for both of us. The next morning, I woke up to an empty apartment. Jake hadn't returned, and I had no idea where he had gone. The silence was deafening, and for a moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed irreparably. I got up, showered, and went about my usual routine, but it felt off. like something important was missing, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I made coffee, sat down at the table, and checked my phone. No new messages from Jake. It was almost noon when he finally came home. The door creaked open, and there he was, looking a little worse for wear, but still unmistakably Jake. He stepped into the living room, his eyes avoiding mine as he shrugged off his jacket. We stood there for a moment, both of us unsure of what to say. The space between us was full of unspoken words, full of things we hadn't addressed. Jake started, but then stopped, running a hand through his hair. He looked at me finally, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. I don't know what happened last night. I don't know what I was thinking. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Jake, it's fine. I get it. We were both. He shook his head quickly, cutting me off. No, it's not fine. I don't know what to do with what happened. I didn't mean to make things weird between us. His words hit me harder than I expected. I knew he was struggling, but hearing him speak so openly about it made everything feel more real. I stood up slowly, taking a step toward him. Jake, I don't want things to be weird. I don't know what this means, but I don't want to lose our friendship over this. He looked at me, his expression softening. I don't either, he whispered. But I need time to figure this out. I don't know what I'm feeling, and I don't want to hurt you. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The emotions I had buried all night were rising to the surface, but I didn't have the words to express them. Take all the time you need, I said softly, stepping back. I'm not going anywhere. And in that moment, I realized that whatever this feeling between us was, it wasn't going to be simple. It wasn't going to be easy. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth figuring out. Jake nodded, a small, grateful smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Thanks, man. But I still wasn't sure where we went from here. We were both standing on the edge of something we weren't prepared to face, and I had no idea what the future held. Would this be the beginning of something deeper? Or was this a fleeting moment we would both move past? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing. Things could never go back to the way they were. Not after last night. Not after what we had shared. The apartment was quiet again, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. Jake had left for the day, and I'd spent the hours since he walked out trying to process everything that had happened. The moment we shared, the distance that followed, everything was tangled up in my mind, impossible to untangle. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, waiting for a message from him. But the screen remained blank, and the silence seemed to stretch on longer than it ever had before. I didn't know what I was waiting for. An explanation? A resolution? Something to make sense of what had felt like an earthquake, shifting everything beneath my feet. The truth was, I didn't know where things stood anymore. Neither of us had the words to speak the truth that was now hanging in the air between us. We were both afraid of what it meant, afraid of what it could mean if we let this moment define us. Had it been a mistake? A slip in judgment fueled by alcohol and emotions? Or is there something real there? Something worth pursuing? The unanswered questions gnawed at me, but I didn't know how to find the answers. I didn't know how to talk to him without risking everything we had. Just then my phone buzzed. My heart jumped in my chest as I grabbed it, hoping it was Jake. But it wasn't. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. I think we need to talk. Soon. The words sent a chill through me. The message was brief, but the implication was clear. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening as a sense of unease settled in. Who was this? Why now? I glanced at the time, nearly 9 p.m. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it Jake? Had he changed his mind? Or was this something else entirely? Something I wasn't ready to face? I typed a quick reply, my fingers shaking slightly as I asked who it was, but the message stayed on the screen for a moment before I pressed send. My phone buzzed again before I could even look away. This time, it was a name I knew all too well. Jake. I opened the message, and my heart skipped a beat when I saw his words. I need to explain. Can we meet? Tomorrow? At the usual place? 1,000 thoughts ran through my head. The usual place? Where we had always gone after work, after class, when we just wanted to talk about anything, life, the future, everything and nothing. Was this him wanting to clear the air? Or was he pushing me further away? I glanced at the empty apartment around me, feeling the weight of everything we had said, and hadn't said. My mind kept circling back to the same question. Where do we go from here? I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing. This was far from over. And as I sat there, staring at the screen, I realized that whatever happened next, it would change everything. I took a deep breath, hit send, and agreed. And just like that, the question was still there. Would we be able to face the truth together? Or would this be the last time we ever spoke about it?